All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Pirkei Avos class. This week we studied chapter 5, one of my favorite chapters of Pirkei Avos. So chapter 5 deals a lot with numbers, and one of the unique differences between chapter 5 and the previous chapters is that Mishnah just assembles statements in chapter 5. We don't have authors of these statements. Until the very end, you have a Mishnah of at the very end we have a few from some fascinating people, Ben Bagbag, Yehuda Ben Tema, but until then it's mostly statements about for a little bit numbers throughout history and numbers of different types of people. It's very fascinating and really allows for reflection about where I stand in the different examples that the Mishnah gives. But today, I want to talk about Avraham Avinu, because chapter 5, Mishnah 3, tells us about Avraham, about Abraham. So let's read the Mishnah, maybe some of the classic commentary, and then dive into some of the deeper ideas on this Mishnah. So, Mishnah, chapter 5, Mishnah 3, what page in the Siddur, Bob? 286 in the blue Siddur. Says the Mishnah, Asara Nisyonos Nisnasa Avraham Avinu Alav Hashalom. Avraham Avinu of blessed memory was tested 10 times. 10 times Avraham was tested. Ve'amad bikulam, and he withstood each of these tests. Lehoidia, so that it be known, Kama chibasoi shall Avraham Avinu Alav Hashalom, so that it be known how great Avraham's love was to Hashem. So Avraham Avinu was tested 10 times. Why was he tested 10 times? So that it be known how much Avraham Avinu loved Hashem. Okay, so there's some obvious questions on this Mishnah, and there's some less obvious questions in the Mishnah. Perhaps the most obvious is, what are those 10 tests? What are the 10 tests of Abraham? Because if you look at the Torah, at no point, the Torah does not list it. The Torah mentions the idea of Avraham being tested only once. And yet over here we have 10 tests. And what about Yitzchak? What about Yaakov? What about the other forefathers? What about those that came afterwards? So the Mishnah does go on to say that the Jewish people were tested when they left Mitzrayim. But what exactly are the 10 tests, and why Avraham was tested? Why does it use the words Avraham Avinu? Avraham, our father. Why not just Avraham? And in case you want to say, well, Avraham is always introduced as Avraham Avinu, that's not the case, because one Mishnah earlier, we also come across Avraham, and over there it simply says Asara Doros Me NoachVad Avraham, 10 generations from Noach to Avraham. So if we're, I understand, but in Mishnah 2, wait, where do you see Avraham our father in Mishnah 4? In the actual wording of the Mishnah, it doesn't say that. I'm not sure in the translation. I'm looking at only a Hebrew text. The Hebrew text, it just says Minoach ad Avraham, and again it says Ad Sheba Avraham. Gimel, it says Nisnasa Avraham Avinu. So why suddenly here do we need to know that it's Avraham our father? If we're going to introduce Avraham as our father, the first time we come across him is where it should say what he was to us, and then afterwards it would be unnecessary. And over here it's the other way around. It starts by saying Avraham, and then the second time it mentions it, it says Avraham Avinu. Why is that? Okay. And what was the purpose of this? What's the purpose of the 10 tests? And the Mishnah somewhat says it. Would we not know that Avraham loved God without these 10 tests? So what is the explanation of all this? So let us read through some of the basic commentary over here and talk about what these 10 tests were. So let me begin with a basic understanding of what they were. There's actually numerous opinions of what the 10 tests were. Let's share some of them. And there's some tests that Avram went through that everyone agrees with. Like, for example, the test of the binding of Isaac. The Akedah is, by every account, is one of the tests. Because the Torah itself says, Hashem nisa es Avraham, Hashem tested Avraham. So the test of the Akedah is certainly one of the tests of Avraham. But what are the other 9? And here we have some differences. And maybe it challenges us to think about what is the definition of a test. So let's read some of the commentaries on what the 10 tests were. Okay, let's start with many Rishonim who list it as follows. Rashi, for example, says these are the 10 tests of Avraham. The first one is, this is not a very well-known story because the first several come before we are introduced to Avraham. It's not told in the Torah. This is simply known by the Medrash. The first is, according to Rashi, that when Avraham was born, Nimrod wanted him killed. Basically, when Avraham was born, there were already stargazers who were able to determine, and they told Nimrod that there was a young child born who is going to threaten your authority. And so Nimrod determined that there was the son of Terach, and therefore he ordered him to be killed. And Terach, instead of killing his son, hid his son, and hid him. And there's all sorts of fascinating midrashim, hid him in a cave, hid him in the ground for 13 years. So that's test number 1. Now you can see why perhaps others would not count that. And many don't count that as one of the 10 tests. The reason being, why would that not be one of the tests? He didn't have much agency. It wasn't exactly something that he had to pass. This was, if anything, it was a test on his parents. So that's why many won't count it, but Rashi counts it, and others count this as the first test. The second test is another story which is, well, not mentioned in the Torah, but it's referenced in the Torah. But it's relatively well known. The story of Ur Kasdim, in which Avram is thrown into a fire by that very same Nimrod, who, when Avram rejects the worship of Nimrod, Nimrod says, well, we'll throw you into a fire and see what happens. And he agrees to be thrown into the fire rather than to submit to the idolatry of Nimrod. That's test number 2. Test number 3 is where we come across already in the Torah. And that is the first conversation the Torah records between Avram and God, in which God tells him, Lech lecha me'artzecha, leave your land and travel to the land where I will show you, which ultimately is Israel. So Avram is asked to leave everything behind. He's 75 years old. And he leaves. And that's test number 3. Test number 4 is that when he arrives in Eretz Yisrael, when he fulfills that request and arrives in Israel, what's awaiting him? A famine. There's a famine. That's test number 4. Test number 5 is that he goes down to Egypt. What happens when he arrives in Egypt? His wife is taken from him. Sarah is taken from him to the house of Pharaoh. This is one of 2 times that this happens. But that's test number 5, that his wife is taken from him. Test number 6. And we'll move quickly. Each one of these stories we can be elaborated on, but if one has knowledge of the Chumash, one is familiar with this. Text number 6 is the battle of the kings, in which you have the 4 kings battling the 5 kings, and Avraham has to go to battle against the victorious 4 kings. That's test number 6. Test number 7 is the Bris Bein Habsarim, that moment in which Avraham has a conversation with God, the covenant that he binds with Hashem, and Hashem tells him, your children are going to be slaves in a land they don't know. I mean, to think about, we read through, we know the story in hindsight. We know the story, how it plays out. But to think of the challenge to Avram hearing that his descendants are going to be enslaved for 400 years in a hateful land, one can only imagine the pain that he had to endure with that. That's test number 7. Test number 8, and if I'm not mistaken, no, I'm not. This is incorrect. Test number 8 is that he circumcised himself at the age of 99 years old. Test number 9 is that he was commanded to send away his wife and son, Hagar and Yishmael. And test number 10 is the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. So that is how several of the Rishonim understand the 10 tests. I don't want to go through how each one enumerates it, but some who take out some and replace it with others. So some include the fact that interestingly, some divide the sending away of Hagar and Yishmael. If you think about it, when he had to send away, there was two episodes in which he first sent away Hagar. If you read the Torah, first he sent away Hagar. First, he had to send her away because Sarah was upset, and he sent Hagar away. This is the woman who he had married and was taken in, and now he had to send her away. Later, he had to send away Hagar and Yishmael. After, when Yishmael was getting older and was a threat to Yitzchak, then he sent them away again. So those who consider that to be two different tests. And then there's some who include the fact that he married Hagar as a test, that God tested him. It's interesting that Sarah suggested to take Hagar as a wife. Hagar was also the daughter of Paro, so the fact that he agreed to that and took Hagar as a wife is counted as a test. Others include the fact that he didn't have children for many, many years as one of the tests. That Sarah didn't have children until he was 100 years old. That's considered one of the tests as well. So really, when you count all the different opinions, so Avram was tested more than 10 times. The question is, which do we include in the 10 tests? But Avram was tested more than 10 times. There's another opinion which says that the burial of Rabbeinu Yonah, almost everyone lists the binding of Isaac as the 10th test. The final test is the binding of Isaac. But Rabbeinu Yonah, in the great Rishonim commentaries, he says he actually lists an event that took place afterwards as the final test, and that is when it came time to bury Sarah, he even though the land that he was in had been promised him by God. God says, I'm going to give you this land, its breadth and its width, it's all going to be yours. And yet when it came time to burying Sarah, he didn't even have a portion of land to bury her. He had to find someone and then pay a very pretty penny to Ephron to bury his wife. So Rabbeinu Yonah says that's the 10th test. Good, so these are the 10 tests of Avram. But let's perhaps delve a little bit further in the deeper question over here, which is, why did Avram have to go through these tests? And maybe by extension, why do we go through tests in life? Why do we go through tests in life? So allow me to share, and obviously this is a very personal topic, as everyone faces tests. For some, it may be a very painful topic. Some of the tests that we face in life can be quite painful. But allow me to share, David, if you don't mind, let's hold off just a little bit. So I want to get into this next topic. We're short on time. Allow me to share some of the commentary on this topic. Why does God test us? So let's start with the Rambam. The Rambam, Maimonides, who wrote about all of Torah, one of his more unique books is the book of the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, in which he tries to address some of the deeper questions people may have, those who struggle with faith. It's a challenging book to study, but a deeply profound book. So in this, in the Moreh Nevuchim, he addresses this in section 3, chapter 24. And he says, the goal of the tests that people face and that are recorded in Torah, whether it's Avraham or Yitzchak or Yaakov or the tribes or Yosef or the Jewish people in Egypt or after Egypt. So he says, and this is something which we're going to see this idea expressed by many different commentaries in different ways. He says the idea is a major reason for it is so that those around them will know and learn how to behave in certain situations. So God never doubted Avraham's love. To say that God tested Avraham, when we think of the word test in most circumstances is to know the information. I test you because I want to know if you know that information. So whether it's an algebra test or a driving test or a swimming test, we want to know the test. The purpose of the test is to know if the one being tested knows or is familiar or has the information or the abilities. When it comes to the test of Avraham, that was not the case. God did not test Avraham to find out if Avraham loved him. God calls Avraham already earlier in the Torah. Hashem explicitly says, I know that Avraham loves me. I know that Avraham is committed and devoted and will teach his family as well. Right? Where does the Torah say that? right before the destruction of Sodom, before Hashem destroys Sodom, Hashem says, I will tell Avraham what I'm about to do because I know how much he loves me. So therefore, I owe it to him to give him this information. And he does. And there's the whole dialogue between Avraham and Hashem. The point is, Hashem already stated, how many people in the Torah does Hashem say? You have that about Moshe Rabbeinu, you have it about Avraham. I don't know if anybody else, where Hashem mentioned in the Torah itself is recorded, Hashem says, I know this person is dedicated. And yet many of the tests that Avraham has tested happen afterwards. So clearly, the goal of these tests is not the common understanding of a test, to know that which, to determine Avraham's commitment. Hashem knows Avraham's commitment. So rather, and Rambam extends this to other circumstances where the righteous are tested. So he says, often a person is tested, especially a righteous person, especially if it's a righteous and renowned and a known person, is so that when people watch how they pass the test and how they respond to these tests, people will know how they are meant to deal with these challenging tests in life. The Rambam goes on to say, and to strengthen the faith of others. Avraham's faith didn't need to be strengthened. But when I look at someone and I see the test that they've been through and see how they responded. So A teaches me how to respond, and it strengthens my faith to see someone else, a righteous, a holy person, in how they respond to the tests that they face. The second point, the Rambam continues and says, specifically, the test of the Akedah, the test of the binding of Isaac, which is the ultimate test, was there to teach the Jewish people and all the descendants afterwards to what degree one is meant to have love and fear of Hashem. To what degree a person's love and fear of Hashem is meant to be. This week's Torah portion is Ekev. Both this week and last week, we have the Torah's commandment of love of Hashem with all your heart and with all your soul. Last week we said, that you should love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. This week's Torah portion, we have the second paragraph of the Shema, which again says, if you will listen, to love God, and to serve Him, with all your hearts and all your souls. So the mitzvah of love of Hashem is most clearly and most explicitly described in last week and this week's Torah portion. And Avraham Avinu shows us to what degree that Avos Hashem is meant to be, how far one is meant to take it. The second thing the Rambam says, which is very kind of fascinating, a little bit out of left field, if you may. And that second thing is that, and this is more Nevuchim, how confident a prophet is in their prophecy. Avraham had a prophecy that he should bring his son as a sacrifice, and yet he had such certainty in that prophecy that he didn't hesitate to fulfill that command. So that's the second thing the Rambam says. I don't want to get too far into that. There happens to be a disagreement about what prophecy was for sages. But let's push that aside for a moment. But I do want to share one more idea, which is described by the Medrash. Fascinating Medrash with the commentary of the Alshich. The Medrash says like this: on this pasuk, the pasuk which talks about Hashem testing Avraham, and God tested Avraham, the Medrash quotes a pasuk from Tehillim, chapter 11, verse number 5, in which it says, Hashem tzadik yivchan. Hashem tests the tzaddik. And the Medrash basically says that Hashem specifically tests those who are righteous. Specifically, the tzaddik is tested, which again flies in the face of what we typically think about a test. We think a test is there to determine if a person knows or doesn't know, is capable or incapable. So then the tzaddik is the last person who needs to be tested. Okay, the tzaddik is judged differently, that's true. But again, all part of the same thing, right? But the point over here is you would think the tzaddik is the last person who needs to be tested because the tzaddik has already passed the test. The tzaddik has shown his commitment, her commitment. And yet, Tehillim says, Hashem yivchan tzaddik. Hashem tests the tzaddik. Says the Medrash like this. This is what the Medrash says. Oh, my Rabbi Yonason. Yonason, the Gemara, the Medrash gives three opinions gives three parables from three different people to appreciate this idea of Hashem testing the tzaddik. The first is, Rabbi Yonason says, Ha pishtoni hazeh. What's a pishtoni? Pishton is flax. So pishtoni is the person who puts together, who combs, who prepares the flax. The pishtoni hazeh, kishem pishtoni luka. If the flax is luka, is smitten, is unhealthy, so he doesn't strike the flax, because the weaker or the somewhat rotted flax, maybe again, I'm not my expertise in flax is rather limited, but the point is that the weakened flax he doesn't want to hit. Yes, flax on flax. So it's weakened, and therefore if he strikes it, it's just going to fall apart. Rather, when he strikes the flax, and apparently striking the flax was necessary to remove dirt that's embedded in the flax. When he strikes it, he only strikes the good flax. He only strikes the strong flax, so that so that the sediment will come out. So that's the example Yonason gives. The flax man. There's got to be a better word for that. But the person who tends to the pishtan, he strikes specifically the flax that he knows to be healthy and strong. Okay, that's Rabbi Yonason's opinion. That's Rabbi Yonason's example. The another statement from Rabbi Yonason, the same Rabbi Yonason gives another example, and he says, the yoitzer hazeh, someone who forms vessels, so someone who creates vessels. Creates is probably not the best word. Someone who puts together vessels. But then at the end of the job, he wants to show in his store. He wants to show the customer the strength of the vessel. So he strikes it with a stick. So he's not going to strike the weaker vessels. He's not going to strike with that stick the vessels which he feels maybe aren't very strong. Rather, when he wants to showcase the vessels he has, he hits the ones which he's confident are strong enough. That's right. But in this kalim, in this department, you want to strike the stronger ones, because those clearly have the strength to withstand the striking. That is the second example, that the Medrash gives to explain the idea of Hashem testing tzaddikim. And the third one is said by Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer gives a third analogy, and he says, imagine a balabayis shehaya lo shtei paros, a owner who owns two cows. One is strong and one is weak. On which does the owner place the heavy yoke? Obviously, on the stronger of the two cows. That's where Hashem places the stronger yoke. Kach, concludes Rabbi Eliezer, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Menaseh Ela Tzadikim. So too, Hashem gives the most difficult test to the righteous. Shenemar Hashem Tzadik Yivchan. Hashem tests the righteous. Good. So here you have this medrash, and there's three analogies given. Now the question is, why does the medrash have to give three analogies to say the same point? They all say the same point. A stronger entity can withstand a challenge. So therefore, the tzaddikim can withstand the challenge of Hashem. So to answer this question, let's turn to the wisdom of the Alshich. The Alshich is the great sage and commentary, lived in Tzfas, I believe in the 1500s. And he shares the following explanation. He says the three examples given in the Medrash are there to teach us three different reasons why Hashem tests the tzaddik. Right? So the Mishnah says, Lo idea kama chibasai, right? And the Mishnah just says to see how much Avraham loves Hashem. But the Alshich says that itself can be divided into three reasons, and each of the analogies given in the Medrash is there to teach us one of those three reasons. The reason, number one, of the flax, and you see, when you pay attention, you realize there are subtle differences between the three. The idea of striking the flax that the flax man does is because there is dirt within the flax, and the striking of the flax cleanses the dirt. So that, he says, is reason number one, that sometimes there's a tzaddik who maybe has within themselves some elements of Yetzer Hara, has within themselves evil and negative inclinations, animalistic tendencies. And Hashem knows that the only way they will cleanse themselves of the little negative within them is by a test. So Hashem tests them to cleanse them. That's reason number one, and that's similar to the circumstance of the flax. Reason number two, striking of the barrels. That doesn't cleanse the barrels. The vessel is strong. You're not strengthening the vessel by striking it. But by striking the vessel, one is showcasing the strength of the vessel to others. And therefore Hashem, says the Alshich, tests a person to showcase their strength to those around them, which we said earlier, like the Rambam says, that when we watch and observe how a tzaddik responds to nisyonos, to tests, then we are inspired and we are strengthened in our emunas Hashem. And that's the second analogy. What is the third analogy about the oxen? He says there's a third type of reason for a test, and that is, and it's brought down in the holy books, that sometimes a tzaddik has to go through difficult times in order to bring atonement for his whole generation. Sometimes a tzaddik has to go through tests and challenges to atone for the sins of a generation. You have this idea of a tzaddik can bring atonement, like a Kohen Gadol brings atonement to a generation. A tzaddik brings atonement to the generation. And therefore he says the third example, where the stronger cow carries a heavier burden, that heavier burden is for the benefit of others, that plows the field and brings produce and brings a heavy, is able to carry a heavier load. So that, says the Alshich, is the third reason. Sometimes the tzaddik is tested, it goes through a painful period, and it's not because they need cleansing, and it's not even because to show as an example, but rather to help bring atonement and purity to the generation. Much like the cow who has to carry the yoke, the stronger cow carries a heavier burden, and that burden benefits the people who need it. These are the three reasons. Now, I want to. There's a lot more to share, but I want to share a couple of very important points about this idea of being tested. The first is, and this is what the Rabbi talks about. I'll share two ideas. One is, why is it, we asked this already, why is it that when it comes to this Mishnah, it says Avraham Avinu? Why does it say our father, Avraham our father? The previous Mishnah didn't mention Avraham. It mentioned Avraham, 10 generations from Noah to Avraham. It mentions Avraham twice in the previous Mishnah without mentioning Avinu. And over here it mentions Avinu. And the answer to that question is by saying Avinu, the Torah, the Mishnah is conveying that this is our father. And we believe that, and we're all descendants of Avraham. Even someone who is technically not a descendant of Avraham is a descendant of Avraham, right? We have in the beginning of the Shemona Esrei, we say, Elokei Avraham, Elokei. So we call the no, actually, the Shemona Esrei just says Avraham Avinu Yaakov. But we find that everyone refers to the forefathers as Avos, as the fathers, and the mothers as the mothers. Now the question can be asked: what about someone who is a convert? Should a convert perhaps not recite that first blessing of Shemona Esrei? Because I'm going back. I'm just thinking of the words in my mind. We say Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu, the God of our fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Well, what if a person converted into Judaism and they're not a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Maybe they should either skip that first blessing, or there should be a different wording for that blessing. Did they share something? Well, that just raises the question itself. Right, when a convert is referred to, whether it's in a blessing or according to the Torah, we call him Ben Avraham. Well, that's not accurate. What if the convert doesn't descend from Avraham? Granted, Avraham has many descendants who are not Jewish, but why would we assume that a convert descends from Avraham? And the answer to this question is, it's really more of a mystical answer. The answer to this question is, okay, right now I can't. Okay. Well, actually, here. And the answer to this question is that we believe that every Jew inherits the DNA of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the spiritual DNA of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's the neshama. It's not a genealogical connection that we have. It may or may not be, but that's not why we refer to them as our fathers and mothers. The answer is, Moshe, you're right. Your point is correct, but why? The answer is because we have a spiritual DNA. We are descendants of Avraham and Sarah and Yitzchak and Rivka and Yaakov and Leah and Rachel, spiritual descendants. Again, the same question is not only for a convert. The same question is for me. I'm a Kohen. And as a Kohen, I know that I don't descend from Rachel. I know that I descend from Leah because I'm from the tribe of Levi, and Levi was the son of Leah. So I should not refer to Rachel as my mother, and yet we all call Rachel Rachelini. But it's the same point: is there's a spiritual descendants that we have. So when one converts, one is then accepting the Jewish neshama, and that means accepting a new DNA, spiritual DNA, which is the descendancy of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And so therefore, which brings us back to our topic. The topic over here, which is that Avraham, whenever it uses the word Avraham Avinu, it's not just to tell us who he was. It's to tell us something that we inherited from him. So the previous Mishnah talked about 10 generations from Noah to Avraham. That's not relevant. That's not something we all descend from. We don't have that. We can't consider that our quality. But the idea of being able to withstand the tests that Hashem places in front of us, that the Mishnah wants to say, this is Avraham Avinu. This is our father. The Mishnah knows that we're all going to face tests in life. And some may be difficult. And therefore the Mishnah says, this is Avraham, our father. This is the one who gives us the power to withstand this test. Avraham passed this test, and therefore he gave us the ability to do so. A, because we are descendants of Avraham, every one of us. And B, because once it's done, it's easier to then continue to do. Once I remember hearing an idea that for the longest time, there was a concept called the 4-minute mile. Running a mile in 4 minutes. And for the longest time, it was considered to be an unreachable goal. Unreachable. Until, who ran the 4-minute mile? It was Roger Bannister, right?
He was roommates with a Jewish person.
Okay, all right. Roommates with a Jewish person. I didn't know that. That's probably what gave him the strength to do it. But the, oh, interesting. Okay.
And furthermore, the whole world regarded him as Jewish, and Joshua was Jewish. He had a non-Jewish mother.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay. Okay. So Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile, was it 50 years ago or so? Was it that long ago?
Chariots of fire, is that what we're talking about?
Okay, I don't know. I don't get distracted here. I thought it was 50 years ago. He says closer, 100 years ago. That could be. But here's the point I want to get to. Once he ran the 4-minute mile, within 5 months, someone else had run the 4-minute mile. And then shortly afterwards, hundreds of people were able to run the 4-minute mile. What happened? Suddenly human beings became stronger? No. What happened was that as soon as one person was able to pass this test, it gave the confidence and the certainty to everyone else that this can be done. And therefore it allowed others to do it. Avraham passing these tests, and specifically the test of the Akedah, A, allows us to do it because he's Avraham Avinu, and our father, and we have the DNA of Avraham's abilities, spiritual abilities. And B, Avraham showed the world, Solal es haderech, he paved the path, showing the world that it can be done, that level of commitment to Hashem can happen. And that's why it says Avraham Avinu. And that's the idea. Finally, the one point which I'll just share briefly, even though it's part of a broader discussion, and that is, what is this? Everyone focuses, why is it that even though Avraham was tested 10 times, only once does Hashem say to him, only once does the Torah spell it out, Hashem nisa es Avraham, Hashem tested Avraham. Why only once? So the explanation given, elaborated in Chassidus, is because the 10th test was the ultimate test. Because the 10th test of Avraham was a test in which he was asked to do something which negated everything that he had ever dreamed of and accomplished. Avraham was asked to sacrifice his son, Yitzchak. And this was the son who he had waited until he was 100 years old to have. God had promised that this is the son this is the son from the nation is going to descend from. And now the entire future, which God had told him and promised him, now was going to be sacrificed. And Avraham never hesitated. He was ready to do it. I read today in an explanation of the Rebbe's approach to this, a very interesting wording of this. When we think of sacrifice, we often think the highest level of sacrifice is sacrificing one's life. That is the greatest form of sacrifice, sacrificing one's life. But really there's something greater than sacrificing one's life, and that's sacrificing oneself. One could sacrifice one's life for the self that they have lived for their entire life. In other words, if I have certain beliefs and passions, and I believe this is the only way of life. So I'm ready to give that up because this is what I live for. Or maybe I believe very strongly in an olam haba, in a world to come, which is a reward for extreme sacrifice. So I give up my life because of the fulfillment of self. But one who's ready to give up the fulfillment of themselves, give up their entire being, fulfillment of self, that this is everything I've stood for, awaited. This is my life's ambitions, my goals, my dreams, my belief system. And I'll give that up simply because for Hashem, that's a greater level of sacrifice. And that's what happened by the 10th test of Avram, the Akedah. Hashem said, I want you to give up your son, which was everything to Avram. It made no sense. It made no sense from a religious standpoint. But because Hashem said, that's why he did. And that's why this is the ultimate test of Avram. And that's why we say that in the davening every day. Before the Hodu, before the Shachris prayer, many have the custom of reciting that section of the Torah because it is such an essential part of Judaism, is this idea of sacrificing of oneself. And one doesn't have to give up their life to give up themselves. Anytime I commit myself and I do something for Hashem which doesn't make sense to me, which is not it doesn't help further my career, it doesn't help further my ambitions, but just because Hashem said so, that's sacrifice of self. And this is the 10th test of Abraham, and that is the significance. And that's why specifically that one is where it says Hashem nisas Avraham, Hashem tests Avraham. And again, Avraham Avinu, Avraham our father, because this is a quality that we all are able to emulate and not only face these tests, but withstand those tests and experience the joy and the strength and the connection to Hashem that a test allows us to achieve. All right, thank you everyone for joining for this study session.